What's up, guys? Welcome to Gimme the Mic with Coach Donavin Britt. And I'm here to talk to you today about who the hell is Coach Donavin Britt? And why am I doing this? How did I end up in this chair? How did I end up in this business? I don't know sometimes how I got here, but I'm glad I'm here. This is the life we chose. So I'm going to share the story with you. So I lived in Alaska, in Anchorage, Alaska. My grandparents moved there in the 60s. My grandfather actually left my grandmother and my mother and my aunt in California and went to Alaska to get a job based on the word of one of his former Army cohorts, one of his fellow soldiers. Basically told my grandfather, if you can get up to Alaska, I can get you a job. At which point he did. Scraped together every dime he had, went to Alaska to get a job, and with the promise of course, sending for my grandmother and my mother and aunt when he got established. So he was the first black man to work for the phone company up there, and he was a lineman. And what that means, he was hanging telephone line. He was climbing poles in the dead of winter, hanging telephone line in Anchorage, Alaska, and went up there when the roads weren't even paved. And Alaska was still the great frontier, the last frontier. And that's what it's called up there. And growing up in Alaska, living in Alaska for a little while, I lived actually all over the place. My mom was somewhat a vagabond, liked to travel a lot. And so it exposed me to a lot of different cultures and growing up that way and being the only African-American kid in a class and being one of many. I've had both experiences. So it led to a very unique, I think, formative years for me, learning how to deal with people from different cultures and learning their cultures and learning their songs and eating the foods and being somewhat mesmerized by the differences, but also, more importantly, the unique similarities that each group has. So in Alaska, you're an Alaskan first. And you guys who live in Alaska and have been there, you may have noticed that you're an Alaskan first. It's different. And they even call the lower 48 states the lower 48, right? Because things are a little bit different in Alaska. And we have weather extremes up there. Like even growing up in the summertime, the most unique thing, daylight. It's pretty much daylight all the time in the summertime. And in the wintertime, it's dark all the time pretty much. In the dead of winter, you might have a couple of hours of daylight during the day at the most. So I remember getting up, going to school, walking to school in the morning, and everything mattered in Alaska, right? So leaving the house in the morning, we had to look outside in the front yard, make sure the moose weren't in the front yard eating the pussy willow trees, then make sure the moose weren't on the trail eating the berries and doing what they do on the trail between us and the school. And that was a real thing. You had to learn how to navigate around those things because they're very dangerous, right? But there was also a freedom that was sort of unique in that kids, we were kind of expected to learn how to navigate. Like we were latchkey kids, most of us. Our parents worked. So we were responsible for getting ourselves to and from school. And some of us had siblings. Like I had my younger sister, I'd walk her to and from school and make sure I picked her up after school and made her lunch and the whole bit. So it fostered an independence. And I think that's a good thing. I think the negative obviously is parents are at work and sometimes you miss that time with your kids. But the positive is you're turning out kids who are self-sufficient, who have developed leadership skills, whether they wanted to or not, who've also developed the concept of working with team because you have to. So that unique experience of living in Alaska with all the hunting and the fishing and all that other stuff was extremely beneficial in my life, and some of the best times of my life I spent in Anchorage, Alaska. So as I mentioned, my mom was somewhat a vagabond, and we moved quite a bit. And when you move quite a bit, you start to learn a couple things. Number one, people tend to notice when you're the new guy on the block. And two, it was difficult to emotionally connect to people for me because I wasn't in the same place for a long time. Up until I was a sophomore in high school, I was never in the same school back to back to back. So while that was difficult sometimes to connect, it was easy, though, to say goodbye, right? And I developed very early in my life this concept of don't hold on to things, don't love anything that can't love you back. Right? Don't hold on to inanimate objects, hold on to experiences and try to make the most of the situation. Unfortunately, when you also move into other neighborhoods, you're going to get bullied. You're going to run into the bully. It happened to me so often because we moved so often that eventually I just developed a plan. I would seek out the bully and find out how we were going to handle this. Are we going to be friends or are we going to eventually have some sort of conflict? If we're going to have a conflict, let's do it now and get it out of the way. That was my mentality. That's what kept me safe. So here's a quick story. So we moved from Alaska to Stamford, Connecticut. which Stanford at the time was kind of going through this, I'd say this interesting rebirth, if you will. It was in the 80s, so there was a lot of yuppies that lived, that worked in New York and lived in Stanford, but not everyone in Stanford was rich. There was also projects in Stanford. There was also a waterfront in Stanford. You guys know Stanford, Connecticut. Any waterfront town, I don't care where it is, there's always a rough element that comes with that because of the type of jobs that the people do on the ships and the type of guys that are drawn to that, and sometimes the organized crime that's drawn to that and all those things. As a young man, leaving the safe confines of Anchorage, Alaska, and going to Stanford, Connecticut, the cultural shock was completely different. Mind you, I get to Stanford, and everyone's got that East Coast mentality, also the East Coast accent. I did not have that. I stuck out like a boner in sweatpants. I mean, it was that different. And then the cultural enclaves of the East Coast were something that also did not really exist in Alaska at the time. What I mean by that is there was the Jamaican side of town, there was the Puerto Rican tenement, there were the Asian side, and so it was very much a group collective, and you kind of had to know how to navigate and who you were with and where you were around in order to make it safe. Speaking the way that I speak, carrying myself the way that I did, I made myself an easy target. On top of that, my parents, at the time, they had a bar. The family had a bar and a deli. So the perception for some of the kids is that we were wealthy, which we were not. But as opposed to them, maybe we were. I didn't miss any meals, and I had the coolest lunches going because I would go into the deli and shop and get whatever I wanted. And so I think that was also what made me a target as well. So being not from there, speaking the way that I spoke, dressing the way that I dressed, and conducting myself in that manner, I was a bully's magnet. And it would start in the morning on the bus. It would continue at school and then after school. And I got into a lot of fights because of it. And so finally, my grandfather was like, look, we're going to put you in martial arts because you're fighting too much. So that began my journey in Stanford, Connecticut, my journey into martial arts, the traditional Japanese system. So martial arts became somewhat of a release for me and a relief, if you will, because while I was fighting all the time, I was winning and I would lose some, but martial arts gave me a skill set now, an understanding, and really, I think, planted the seed that if you practice long enough, things become second nature. And with that second nature, you have an advantage over someone who does not train. And so I remember specifically being jumped by these three brothers, these three Jamaican kids. Two were twins. One was named Lance, and the other one, I can't remember the other kid's name. It's been far too many years. But at any rate, they made the decision to jump me after school, after we got off the bus. And it didn't go so well for them, right? Because one jumped on my back, and I was able to execute a throw, and nothing hits harder than the earth. So he was out of the fight almost immediately, and it was one-on-one with the other brother, but I didn't know the third brother was there. Anyway, I went to a force multiplier. I grabbed a stick that was behind the bar. We were in between the bar and the post office was where all the junk stuff was. So I grabbed a stick and I went to work on this guy. And I remember trying to hit him, and I wound up to hit him, and my feet come off the ground. And I'm like, what is going on? I've got my stick in my hand and my feet are off the ground. And I look up, and my dad's friend Dale, who worked at the post office, who was probably out taking a smoke break. I don't know what he was smoking, but he was taking a smoke break. And he saw the fight, and my feet come dangling off the ground. And Dale was a monster. Dale was a big, big dude. And he's like, don't hit him anymore. You're going to kill him. Grabs a stick for me. And I'm like, that all made sense to me. Like, well, they're trying to fight me, and there's more than, one of them. I got to get a stick. And so my mentality started to develop there. Like, I understood, okay, when faced with those sort of insurmountable odds and I can't run away, I'm going to have to fight hard, and I'm going to have to fight dirty, and I have to do what I need to do to go home. So it was innate to a certain extent, but added training to that, now it becomes instinctual and technical, right? So this was my reasoning for being in martial arts, and so I've always valued it from that point on. The problem is we moved around so much I couldn't stick in one system to learn it long enough. But that ended up actually being a help because I started developing basically an MMA mentality. I took a little bit of boxing and a little bit of wrestling and a little bit of judo and a little bit of karate and Filipino martial arts and all this stuff. And next thing you know, I had a pretty unique fight skill set that if I had to practice one of those individual martial arts, perhaps at a tournament, I would have probably sucked, right? Because I didn't have enough of the knowledge. But in a street environment where there aren't any rules of engagement and I can do what I just need to do, it was something that was an advantage certainly for myself. And I didn't know it then, but it actually influenced the way that I teach and coach martial arts now. I started reading books about Bruce Lee and Muhammad Ali, two of the biggest influences in my life. And Bruce Lee's mentality of take what's useful, but discard what is not in regard to martial arts. And that made sense to me. Honestly, it made sense to me, but that's the way I had to do it because we moved around so much. I didn't really have a choice. So I'm kind of sampling and taking as much as I can while I'm there. And so this trend continued. We moved to Wisconsin and we moved, back to California eventually. And now I hit California and I'm about 8th grade. But prior to that, let's back up for a second. Prior to that, before that point, I left Alaska, athletics I'd gone back to Alaska, and athletics became a pretty big part of my life. In fact, we left Stanford and went back to Alaska. And I think the day after I got to Alaska, there was a Arco Oil Company had basically a junior Olympics at that point called the Jesse Owens Games. And so they were nationwide. And so my grandmother worked for Arco, and I just got to Alaska. And I think they were just trying to find something for me to do so I wouldn't be at home all day. And they said, hey, tomorrow there's this thing, you should go play in it. And I'm like, okay. So I went to the event, the track event, and I actually ended up winning a couple of events. And one of the events I won, I represented the state of Alaska at the Nationals at UCLA that summer. And I remember very vividly winning the event, walking across the field, and my mother was standing on the side, and she's like, what are you doing? Where are you going? Did you win a bike? Because that's all I wanted, right? It was a bike. And that was some of the prizes that you can win. Bike, and then there was like skateboards and balls and all this, that kind of stuff. But no, I said, no, I won. I'm going to UCLA. And my mom was like, what? And so at that moment, I realized that I had some athletic skill as well. And that when you put me in a room with other athletes, I would do fairly well with them. Whether or not I won or not, I would always place in the top. So we started harnessing those things too. And then we moved to California. Basically, after we moved to Connecticut, and we'd been there for a school year, right? We moved back to Alaska. My grandparents were still there. My mom, I think the marriage was going south, and they decided to divorce. My adoptive father and my mom decided to divorce. We moved back to Alaska. And when I'm in Alaska, I match up athletically fairly well with the kids that are there. And so one of the first events that I went to was the Jesse Owens Games, which was put on by Arco. And after I ended up winning that and representing the state of Alaska in the national events at UCLA, I figured out pretty quickly that I'm like, okay, I like this sport thing. And it was track and field at that point, but I was also playing Pop Warner football up there. I was playing basketball, league basketball, little kid stuff, right? So we're talking about middle school, 6th, 7th grade. When I went to Jesse Owens, I think it was the 6th grade, my summer of my 6th grade year, and then I played football when I came back. Football became a pivotal sport in my life. We then again moved when I was in 8th grade, right? So the summer between 7th and 8th grade I spent, now this is 1987, which was probably the greatest summer of hip hop ever. So that's a whole nother subject. But that was a big part of my life too. Remember I talked about learning songs and music. Well, in Alaska at the time, I know this is hard to believe because hip hop is the #1 genre all around the country, and even Alaska is there. But at that time, when I was a kid, there were no radio stations that played Black music at all, and least of all hip hop. We had a pirate radio station called Soul to Soul, and it would come on, and I remember vividly sitting around and recording on cassette, recording the broadcast of the radio station just to kind of hear music. And that was the only way that we kept in the loop. And then our friends and family who lived in the lower 48, they would record their radio shows and send the music tapes to our friends, and we would make copies of the tapes. It was very, very intricate in that way. So guys would come to school and be like, hey, my cousin sent me a tape of hip hop. I got all these. Oh yeah, let me dub that. Guys started dubbing it and selling it for a couple bucks each. I mean, it was wild. It was a different thing, but we would pay for it. It was probably my first introduction to entrepreneurship, to be honest with you, in that regard. But so the communication that was necessary in order for us to get the things that we wanted and needed, that communication skills, those skills became very, very important in addition to being an athlete. But what I found is when I was playing football, whether it was just pick up football game or Pop Warner football game, all of a sudden the bullying sort of ceased because I could play. And even the bullies started to recognize that, okay, this guy can play. He's an athlete. He can play. So now why make an enemy when you can have a friend, because I might end up on their team one day. And sports have a way of doing that. My son has experienced that as well. So being an athlete, I was a terrible student because I couldn't develop really good study habits. I didn't even have the same teachers from year to year. So I kind of had to like Forrest Gump my way through school, at least until I got into high school. So 8th grade, we moved to California, the Bay Area. I'm born in Vallejo, so it's kind of going home. And the Bay Area is what I consider home, just because I was born there and I went to high school there. And so 8th grade, I have a meeting with a man that kind of changed my life, a guy named Gary Weaver. And Gary Weaver he was an all-pro linebacker for the Raiders and the Green Bay Packers in the 70s. I'm walking home from school and he pulls up next to me in this beat-up Toyota Camry, brown Toyota Camry, and it's got crap all over it inside of it. And he goes, hey, son. And I turn and I look at him like, who's this dude talking to me? Son, what grade? How old are you, son? And I told him I'm 14, right? I'm 13. I was 13 then. I'm 13. You're 13 years old. What grade are you in? I'm in the 8th grade now. You're in the 8th grade? Yes. Well, you play football? Yes, I play football, but I'm not in high school yet. Well, I coach at the high school at Sunset. Are you zoned for this school? Yes, I'm going to that school next year. And he writes down on a piece of paper this address. And he hands me the address. He says, you come down to this address. It's right down the street. You come down here tomorrow. You meet me here at 4 o'clock tomorrow. Now, me being somewhat naive, if this happened to my son today, I'd be like, are you crazy? You don't know this guy? You're going to go meet this guy? You don't do that. But in my naivete, then I was like, all right, fine. I mean, I really didn't have any fear of anything happening. I felt fairly confident I could defend myself anyway. And I was fairly street smart. I had seen a lot of stuff in Connecticut and other places that prepared me for living in the Bay Area, particularly Oakland, the Oakland Bay, and on that side, the East Bay. So I show up at his office the next day, and he breaks out this napkin and starts writing a bunch of circles and squares on the napkin and starts it looks like hieroglyphics to me. I'm like, what is this guy doing? And you want to play linebacker. This is you. And he starts breaking down the position of linebacker, but he's also breaking down the other positions. And he's writing it down. And all of a sudden, as he's speaking to me, I swear to you, the roadmap doesn't look like hieroglyphics to me anymore. Instinctively, I understood. Oh, okay. Yeah. He says, well, if you're this guy and this is here, where do you go? If this guy goes here? Like, well, I let him go because this guy's over here. Okay. So he starts having these conversations, and this became my tutelage under Coach Gary Weaver, one of the most important male role models I've had in my life, even to this day. So anyway, I would meet him after school. My mom had no idea where I was going after school. Remember, I'm a latchkey kid. She had no idea. So I would go to his office, and he would go into the trash can and break out boxes, and he would set up these agility drills in front of his office, right on the cement, in front of his office, and set up these boxes, high knees over the back, shuffle, cut, like making these drills, sort of NFL shuttle drills and things of this. I had no idea what they were called. I was just doing what he told me to do. And he was like, okay, you suck. Go. You need to work on this. Work on your back pedal. Come back in a couple of days. I want to see that you got better. I come back a couple of days. I was better because I practiced it. Okay. I had no idea what he was preparing me for. I ended up playing high school my freshman year, did really well. And then we moved not from California, but we moved from one city to the next, from Hayward to San Leandro, California. And then San Leandro, California, that is where my life changed. Now we're in San Leandro. I am going into my sophomore year, high school. There's a new coach, brand new coach at San Leandro High School who had a storied history, but had gone through some really down times. So they hired this guy named Joe Martin, one of the most unique, colorful characters I've ever had in my life. He's still in my life to this day. I go into the gym and I meet Joe, Coach Joe. And I said, Coach Joe, who's all on your staff? Who's going to be your coaches? He's like, well, I'm still putting together the staff. I said, well, do you need a linebacker coach? And he said, why? Do you know someone? And I said, yeah, I know Gary Weaver. And he stopped right in his tracks. He looks at me, he says, wait a minute. You know Gary Weaver? And I said, yes. He goes, well, how well do you know him? I said, well, he's been my coach, for over a year and a half. I've been training with him since I was in 8th grade. And I know he's looking for a place to go. I can call him for you if you want me to. He's like, yeah, call him right now. So I call Weave, put him on the phone. Never thought of it, anything of it. 2 days later, we're working out as a group, as a team, and the Camry pulls up. And when the Camry pulled up, I see Weaver get out of the car. He puts on his, he was famous for wearing these sun hats when he ran these big, I see the hat walking in the parking lot, and I turned to my guys and said, uh-oh. And this is what? I said, business is about to pick up. I'm like, this is Coach Weaver. He's no joke. I'm like, but listen, you have to understand, Gary Weaver is from the South. He comes from a different time, right? He grew up in a time where segregation was a thing. And he has a down home kind of old school approach to life, old school approach to the game, old school approach to business. You know, he's a guy that if you tell him you do something, you better do it. You got to keep your word. Accountability was a huge thing. And he was one of these guys that fought for everything that he had. And he expected that out of his players. And the cultural shift that he and Joe were able to create in San Leandro in such a short period of time was amazing. What was also amazing was the out-and-out racism that they would face in San Leandro, California. And I had a front row seat to it. And when I tell you guys some of these stories, we had it all happen. Joe had the audacity to start the first black quarterback ever in high school. And he had nigger lover carved into his car for doing it. But this isn't in the 60s, guys. This is in like 1990. He's 89, 90. So San Leandro is a suburb of Oakland. And it was one of those cities, people didn't like to talk about it, didn't like to admit it. But back then, if you were black and you drove through San Leandro and you had a carload full of black people, you're going to get pulled over. They're going to find a way to pull you over. You're going to get messed with because you crossed that imaginary line. Right you all know it, right at Durant and East 14th, or what they call International Boulevard now. If you cross that line where into San Leandro, you were going to get pulled over. That's just what it was. And as we started winning more and started turning the program around, that happened to us football players less. But there were only a handful of black students in the school when I was a sophomore, and then by the time I was a senior, there were more. But there was a lot of racial tension there, and that kind of helped form my opinions on race, and not only race, but how you can fix it and how you can navigate through it. So it was very important. So all these things that have happened and all these things that have gone on, and I'm talking riots. We had some knockdown dragouts with students and police. Big time, we were all over the news for it. There was an adjustment period from a community standpoint. They had a large influx of African American students coming into a school that was traditionally white, in a city that was traditionally white. At the time, it's not that way now. It's much different now. But so there was some tension there. Now, mind you, I'm still training martial arts at this point. I'm still, not as heavily involved, but I'm still dabbling. I'm still keeping my skill set up. But more importantly, developing my mindset. And the mindset of, you got to be mentally tough, you got to be physical, and you have to finish, right? Those are the three tenets that I kind of built my football career on. So while navigating all the social stuff and the angst and all that other stuff, I'm also still playing football, and I'm playing very well. I get to my senior year, and I'm having a great year. I lead Northern California in rushing, coming out of Northern California. I played with some great guys. I played against Armani Toomer, who ended up, winning, Super Bowl with the Giants. I played with Tarek Glenn, and against Tarek Glenn, Sean Bullard, a bunch of guys that come out of that Bay Area. The Bay Area is a hotbed. And I ended up going to college there. And I go to college. I actually did it in reverse. I actually go to college, play at Chabot College in Hayward. Great storied program there. I leave there. I'm the all-time leading rusher when I leave there. I end up going to Glenville State in West Virginia, play for Rich Rodriguez, great Rich Rodriguez. Glenville, I couldn't do West Virginia. It was too much of a culture shock going from California out to the hills of West Virginia. Nothing against the people. It was just culturally, it was like, whoa, this is like going to Mayberry. I couldn't do it. And so then I ended up coming home. I did not graduate from college. I ended up going into the Army. And martial arts have always been a part of my life, but when I got into the Army, it became even more important part of my life because of the nature of some of the things I was doing with the unit that I was in. I was in a PSYOPs unit, and we would go places oftentimes where we were not allowed to carry weapons, and if we were, they weren't loaded anyway. So, that wasn't our primary function. We weren't an infantry unit. And I was not a door kicker, but we were also responsible sometimes for pulling security and doing things, so martial arts became a thing. That's when I was introduced to Krav Maga for the first time. And that decision to train in Krav Maga was totally selfish. I had no intention of becoming an instructor. I just wanted to learn for myself. But that decision to train in Krav Maga changed my life. So let's fast forward to 2008. We had moved here, 2000. We had moved here in 2001. And now I fast forward to 2008. I had been apprenticing under my old instructor, Professor Donafrio, for about 6 or 7 years. And I'd become an apprentice instructor. And I decided at that point that, like, you know what? I like this instructing. I like helping. I like seeing people grow. I like seeing people who couldn't throw a punch get better and have a chance should they get attacked. That made me very, very happy to contribute to that. And I enjoyed it. And then he decided that he was going to retire, and I bought the school from him in 2008. I had a business partner then. And the school literally saved my family's life. I talk about this all the time. It was 2008. We were involved in real estate, both of us, my wife and I. I was on the real estate acquisition side. She was on the mortgage side. We woke up one day and everything changed. The banks that we were doing business with, they were closed. Like, we were calling banks and literally getting disconnected phone numbers. We had mortgages out, and we had payments on millions of dollars of mortgages that we would have been responsible for. Like, it was terrifying, and went bankrupt, lost everything. And so I'm standing in the financial rubble that is my life with the last maybe $400 or $500 that I have in my account. And I started what would then become Las Vegas Combat Academy. And that was my way of saying F you to the situation. Mind you, in that time frame, I had bought a smoothie franchise from Canada and brought it to the United States. I actually owned and operated at one of the locations and was responsible for growing the brand in the country. And it bombed. It bombed for a lot of reasons, and certainly the economic situation at the time contributed to it, but also the asinine way that this company ran itself also contributed to it. We, myself and my wife, we ran the most successful of the 8 franchisees that had businesses. We ran the most successful one out in Primm, Nevada, on the border of California and Primm, in the desert, in a broken down, busted up mall. We ran the most successful one. So I know other people in other malls, they were struggling and they had way more foot traffic than us. So you guys, when I tell you I had everything lost, everything. And my wife was pregnant with the twins at the time. So I didn't really have time for depression. I didn't have time to second guess. I didn't have time to feel bad for myself or feel sorry for myself. I did the one thing that I knew that I could control, and that was Krav Maga. I knew that I could teach. I knew that I could fight. I knew that I could coach. So I went in with it. This was everything I had, and I was putting all my eggs in one basket. I bet on myself. And that was a great decision, as it turns out. But it was not without bumps. It was not without bruises. It was not without self-doubt. It was not without great peril. And it was sort of living like hanging off a cliff every single day, looking at numbers, wondering how we were going to get, business to come in. And by the way, there was really no blueprint for it, not for a Krav Maga school anyway. So I'm left to sort of kind of thug my way through it, bump my head against the wall, see what works, see what doesn't. Teaching every class in the gym. There were times where even when I finally got an instructor that would cover a class from time to time, I was in the dental chair getting a root canal and an extraction one day. And he calls me because my car broke down. I can't get to the gym and teach. And I've got clients that are waiting, in 5 minutes for class to start. I literally get out of the chair with a missing tooth, take a water bottle, tell the dentist, hey, just pack my gums with some gauze. I'll come back after I go teach the class. No anesthesia. I'm not I'm not kidding. So now I'm standing in a class, spitting blood into a bottle while I'm teaching the class. And my students were looking at me like, are you nuts? What's going on? But this is the commitment level that you have to have. At that point, I really had understood that I have to own my life, not rent my life. Right? So what does that mean? So when you own your house, you can't call the landlord when something breaks. You have to fix it. You have to get it fixed. When you rent, you have the luxury of calling someone else because it's someone else's responsibility and they'll send help. But we started this whole concept with no one's coming to save us. And that was my whole mantra for my life at that point, that if something went wrong, I had to fix it. There were no excuses, no exceptions. I didn't even have anyone I could blame. Plus, I had a wife looking at me saying, hey, I have to provide, and we had 2 little ones on the way, and that was a thing. So that was my motivating factor, was not to fail my family, not to fail, not just in business, but not to fail as a husband, as a father, as a provider, to be able to protect my kids and make sure they never missed a meal, and they didn't. But here's the funny part: no one knew that we were going through this. We were in BK driving Mercedes-Benz and BMWs. And people said, what? How? Yeah, because we made a lot of money during the real estate boom. And so it was a very interesting commentary when we were standing in front of the bankruptcy judge, which, by the way, if you never have to do it, I trust you're not missing anything. But I'll tell you, when you have to open up your entire financial failings to the world in a public forum, humility is something that you have to have a lot of. And if you don't, you will get it during that process. And if you've been through BK, you know what I'm talking about. So why am I talking about BK? Why am I talking about all this stuff? What I'm here to tell you is that when you see our videos and you see me on and I'm teaching and I'm in my element, there's nothing contrived. I'm teaching from my heart. I'm teaching from my experience, but I'm trying to develop in my students also mental toughness. And I let them know that it's going to go to shit sometimes. It's going to, but you have to stand up and keep fighting. So when I say fighting solves everything, it's not just the physical fight. It's the emotional fight. It's the mental fight. It's the fight for your dreams. It's fighting for betting on yourself, fighting for your right to not just exist, but to have a wonderful existence, to have a life, and to leave footprints on earth so people know that you were here. And so for the last, 20 years almost, I've done nothing but teach and train and kind of build this army of people who now have gone off into the world and done wonderful things themselves. Some of them are fighters, but pro fighters or whatever, and AMI fighters, but the 99.9% of them are not. They're just regular people. But they're not regular people. They're exceptional people because they came into our gym looking for strength, looking to belong, looking to improve themselves, looking to heal. And we were able to be a part of that, and they've gone on and done great things. And there's nothing that brings me more satisfaction and joy than seeing my students going out and living the best life possible and applying the principles that they learned on the mat to their day-to-day life.